Production of Autoline This Week is underwritten by...
Let's talk truth. When buying a car, we all want a great deal. Yet it's possible you could pay thousands more for the same car as your neighbor. That's why TrueCar provides upfront pricing information and a network of TrueCar certified dealers that guarantee savings without negotiation. Now, if someone paid too much for their car, well, it won't be you. So, when buying a car, get guaranteed savings. Visit TrueCar.com.
And now, here is your host, John McElroy.
Thank you for joining us on Autoline This Week. We're going to be delving into all kinds of advanced technology on automobiles. And that's because my special guest today is Steve Zimmer, the Executive Director for the U.S. Council for Automotive Research. Steve, great having you on Autoline.
Well, it's great to be here, John. Thanks for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
And that's because joining us today also are Gary Vasilash, the Editor-in-Chief of Automotive Design and Production, and Drew Winder, the Editor-in-Chief of Ward's Auto. And great having the both of you back as well. Steve, for those who don't know, and I'm sure a lot do not know, what is USCAR, the Council for Automotive Research? Well,
USCAR it's a company. It's owned by 3 other companies, and it's located in Southfield, Michigan. It's owned by 3 other companies that are also located in Michigan. You're probably familiar with GM, Ford, and Chrysler. And it's been in existence for 20 years. What USCAR does is we do collaborative work, pre-competitive R&D in a lot of different fields for those with those 3 companies.
So my understanding is prior to USCAR forming, it was illegal for car companies to get together and do any sort of collaborative research.
It was illegal for any competitors to do that. And in the late 80s, the U.S. government made it legal to do pre-competitive, collaborative type of work with competitors. And it took a while for the car companies to figure out, well, maybe that's something we should try to do, because, I mean, up to that point in time, there's a lot of antitrust type of actions against the automobile industry. They didn't want any type of collaboration, and people just didn't talk. So when we got this started, which would have been right around 1990 is when it all started, towards the end of the 80s and the 90s, it took a little bit of time. It was not a comfort space for companies to collaborate.
So do they like to talk to one another now, or do they sort of hold things back and say this is something that we don't want to tell the other 2 guys about?
Yes, they do. No, they do. It's always interesting to try to find out that area where, you have space to collaborate. And I'll just tell you that we at USCAR create a kind of a framework for the 3 companies to come together to do collaborative R&D. And so all of the teams, and we probably have 50 teams there, consist of the top engineers and scientists from each one of the 3 companies in a very specific area. And what they do is they come together and decide, what do we have and what area do we have a common interest in? And once they define a common interest, then they can start to define whether or not they can define a common activity to do together. Now, it's easy for 3 car companies to find common interests. It's not so easy to find common activities.
So what is pre-competitive? Could you define that? I mean, how does that sort out?
It sorts out differently in every area that when we engage in. When a team comes together, there's probably a lot more that's defined as, a lot less that could be pre-competitive than competitive. Almost everything they do they feel is competitive. But as they get through it, and like one of the areas where we do a lot of work is in benchmarking. So we have a advanced powertrain group that has a lot of groups under it. One of them is we have an engine benchmarking group, we have a transmission benchmarking group, and they do a lot of competitive analysis of powertrains together. But before they could agree to do it together, they had to kind of do a data exchange amongst themselves. Well, we're going to benchmark each other's, and we might as well figure out a more efficient way of getting that information. When they first started to do that, they looked at how they did it. They all did it differently. So therefore, even if they could give them the data, it wasn't very useful because you couldn't basically bring it into your system. So first you got to sit down and decide you want to do something. You got to find either a common protocol or a methodology under which to do it, such that everybody gets something out of it. And then you go off and you do the activities. And then as you continue to do it, you get better and better at it, and it becomes much more efficient. So today we do a lot of different benchmarking activities.
Is this how automakers in Germany and Japan collaborate? Do they collaborate like this as well?
Oh yes, yeah, they've been doing this, for a long time. The Japanese certainly have, through MIDI and those types of organizations. And in Europe, the European automotive manufacturers have an organization called UCAR, E-U-C-A-R. Came after USCAR, but it's a very similar name. But it consists of a lot more car companies. And so what would be different between what they do and what we do is that because we have 3 companies, we can do almost everything we do as 3. In some of those larger organizations, they're selective. 2 or 3 of them will do one thing, and then 2 or 3 of them will do another thing. But the answer is yes to your question. They have been doing this for a long time, both in Europe and Japan.
So after 20 years of existence, can you talk about what some showcase accomplishments that you've done? I mean, you're involved in all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, probably one of the most notable things, one of the wholly owned consortia, or LLC, within USCAR is an organization called USABC, United States Advanced Battery Consortium. And this group, in conjunction with a lot of the national labs out of the Department of Energy and some groups in the DOD and some other types of activities, but primarily the DOE, have been working in advanced batteries. And matter of fact, they started early on with nickel metal hydride and then moved into lithium ion. And now they're moving more advanced into lithium air and different types of those types of batteries, all the way from the basic science, the chemistry, the cell, the pack, the manufacturing, so all that technology. And I would say that almost every nickel metal hydride or lithium ion battery that exists today, the technology basis for those batteries is through the work that was done through USABC and the Department of Energy.
So who owns the intellectual property to that?
It depends. When we do these projects, these are leveraged projects, funding coming from the companies as well as the U.S. government. And we'll select suppliers that will actually do the work. And the national labs will tend to do the further out stuff, the basic science stuff. The applied or the actual packed and cell configuration stuff, those projects we do with battery suppliers, such as JCI or somebody like that. So the intellectual property in those that are generated out of those projects does belong to the supplier, but there are agreements that certain the government obviously has access to that intellectual property, and we have some rights into it also.
Steve, of course, this was all formed, USCAR was formed to make American car companies and their suppliers more competitive. You talked about all this advanced battery stuff. We're importing all those advanced cells from Korea by and large. How do you address getting the stuff actually made in the U.S.?
It's been very, very difficult, and it's we continue to work on those challenges. But I'll say one other thing is that the automobile industry is a global business. I mean, if you're going to, other than a few startup companies that, are starting to emerge in some of these areas, most of them are large global companies. And when you're in a global market, you produce and distribute vehicles every place in the world. So it's very difficult to basically say that, the technology would just be used in one particular location. When we are involved in specific projects with the Department of Energy in these areas with our suppliers, basically the ground rules of what comes out of that is that it will be first applied in U.S. location in U.S. products. But it'll eventually spread because the companies will spread it. It's a global market.
If we think back 20 years and we think to today and the challenges that are facing the automakers? It seems that the challenges today are perhaps more severe than they were back then in terms of addressing CAFE regulations.
Right.
So you guys are working on materials and you're working on powertrain, you're working on environmental issues. Is this a more efficient way for the big three to do research in these areas by having something like your organization?
It certainly doesn't replace what the companies do back at their homes. And they have very impressive, R&D organizations in each one of them. And, and those R&D activities are located, primarily in Michigan, but throughout the world. And we augment that. There's a lot of things that, we sit there and you look at lubricants for engines. We don't make lubricants, but lubricants can improve the overall efficiency of how an engine operates. So we have a group that actually works on trying to define and help work with that industry to develop the characteristics of the lubricant that will help us, do that. After treatment is another area where we, work to develop technology that enables all of us in that space, because some of those things are very important in the car, but they're not really visible or to the customer. They're not a reason for buying or not buying, but they're necessary to meet the regulations out there. So those are excellent areas to work together in. Another area is in developing standards, and we'll find that from a quality standpoint, from a supply chain standpoint, sometimes it makes a lot of sense for us to kind of take the lead to developing some common type of parts or specifications, such as connectors. Connectors are very, the electrical distribution system in a car is extremely complex. Connectors are a critical link in that whole process.
So each company would have its own spec
each
for
company,
what a
every
connector
supplier used to, sell this stuff by thing. So we try
nuts and bolts and
the same nuts and bolts and everything like that. So we try to figure out, well, how can we make this so the whole supply chain is smarter and more efficient?
I've got to think, though, that there's people sitting at home right now saying, this isn't right. Competition is the way you get more innovation, and each automaker should be competing, and that's how you're going to get the best. That's how you're going to get the most innovative stuff. How do you respond to those type of criticisms?
Having been involved in both the competitive side of the business and the collaborative side of the business, I would, and I'd venture to say this about any industry, any company, if it's going to be world-class competitive, it better be world-class collaborative, because there's no company in any field, particularly in the automobile field, with all that's coming at it, that has the resources, the time, the expertise to do it all themselves. So you got to figure out where you do it, where you have exclusivity, and you're going to, it's very important to your brand, and where you do it in such a way that it just makes the whole industry more efficient. At the end of the day, both of them are the right solution for the customer because they're creating value.
One of the biggest challenges the industry faces globally right now is coming up with better fuel economy. A key to doing that is lightweighting. One of my hot buttons right now is carbon fiber. Do you see that as a really promising short-term technology, or what other work are you doing in terms of lightweighting?
Well, lightweighting is one of the very early efforts that we got started in at USCAR. Matter of fact, one of our first consortiums, besides the Advanced Battery Consortium, was the Advanced Composites Consortium. And so just your comment on lightweighting the vehicle, first of all, it can be a very cost-effective way of increasing the efficiency of a vehicle. And the nice thing about it is that it's applicable to every single vehicle in every sector that's in the marketplace. So, but the difficult thing is trying to figure out how to change this high-volume, multi-million unit supply chain manufacturing steel system into a multi-material type of system. So in that context, we believe there's a lot of materials that are coming into play increasingly to reduce the weight of the vehicle, including aluminum, including ultra-high strength steels, magnesium, and composites. And we do see opportunities for composites. They're extremely strong, they're extremely light, You can configure them in such a way that you can eliminate a lot of parts, but they're very costly. And so some of the main work that's being done in carbon fibers is to creating low-cost automotive-grade carbon fibers. And when you get to that point, it's just like with batteries. Cost are the big challenges, particularly if you want these technologies to scale.
So this is research that continues on. You said this is one of the earliest consortia.
It continues on, yeah. And matter of fact, I'll give some kudos to some of the national labs. Down at Oak Ridge National Lab, they just over the last year and a half have put together a kind of a pilot plant for carbon fiber, for creating carbon fibers, and we've been involved in this effort for a long time, and it's really a very, very interesting project, and it's almost a full-scale carbon fiber plant. So I mean, I think we're going to get real good results out of that, but it's still a challenge. I mean, we've continued to work on it.
Well, and the big stakeholders in automotive materials are steel and aluminum and whatnot. Now, are you able then to sort of look at some of the little guys who don't have some of the resources and everything else that say the steel and aluminum companies have, to see if there might be more alternatives to some of the major materials? I mean, I think you've done some work with magnesium and some other things. Are you able to champion, I guess, some of these lesser known materials to see what kind of potential they have?
Well, we've had a major effort in magnesium. Let me just comment a little bit about the aluminum and the steel wars or whatever is going on out there. I mean, we work with both of those industries, and they're great to work with. You know, it's kind of sometimes hard to work with them together, but we do a lot of work with a large group of steel suppliers as well as in the aluminum industry. But in the magnesium area, you don't have the big players. You don't have a big industry here, so you're dealing with, you know, smaller companies, if not universities, that are actually doing the work in this space. And we've actually written a roadmap to 2020. We wrote it a few years ago in the magnesium space. Is what do you really need to know and solve and understand about magnesium in order to incorporate it and integrate it into different automotive systems into the car. And so we've got a large project that we've been working on magnesium for a long time, and we've just recently completed, we've gotten actually a major award with the Department of Energy in the magnesium space, and we are, it's a several-year project to try to develop the whole front end of a car and dramatically reduce the weight by using a lot of magnesium. And we've gone through a lot of simulations. We're into developing the parts and the understanding, how they'd be using the car. And we believe that we've shown that a magnesium-intensive front end could reduce the weight of a unibody construction by 45% to 50%, and a frame vehicle by 25%, while reducing the complexity in the part count by up to 60%.
That's extraordinary.
So is this just simulated work, or will you create a front end and say to the industry, okay, this is what you guys need to
Well, just a past success. One of the early parts that we were looking at to do, we did an engine cradle, and actually went on the 2006, the Corvette. And that was done with the teams, at USCAR. But as far as the front end, first it's simulation. Then they developed some, samples and some test protocols and stuff like that. Now they're configuring some shapes and stuff like that to test load paths and stuff like that. And they're also starting to create, not a large volume of parts, but a couple hundred parts to basically understand what the variation is in the manufacturing process, to get all that knowledge together so you can actually go out and feel confident that you can design in that material.
So this isn't just theoretical, this is applied.
It's applied, but it continues to have a theoretical element of it, because at the end of the day, all vehicles are, a lot of them are developed in the CAD space, and even the manufacturing process is. And therefore, I mean, when you bring this stuff together, unless you're going to have a lot of time, to develop it through, iterations at the end of the thing, you want that knowledge base in the CAD system to really understand what the material properties and characteristics are in that application.
So what year are you working in now, and what does the future car look like?
It's pretty, it's complex. Here's our, we have a very broad portfolio of technologies. And so we would love to have a crystal ball. We'd love to be able to pick one. I'm sure anybody else would. The answer, you can't. And even if you could, you'd be wrong. We know that. Because ultimately, so we're working on all this stuff, and then the company's job, and this is where the competitive space is to pick this stuff and try to figure out how and when to incorporate it into vehicles. And at the end of the day, when it starts to scale, I mean, that's when the final vote will be the consumer. They're going to pick the winners. No one else is. And as far as looking at the future and the cafe environment that we're in, I think a lot of the lightweight stuff will move into the vehicles. In the advanced combustion area where we're working, I mean, clearly we're seeing it today, downsizing and boosting of engines. I mean, the internal combustion engine, it's the king of the road out there. Everybody said, well, the thing's got to go. That is not going to go away easily. I mean, it is incredible what the engineers can do to make that cleaner, more efficient, lighter, and a better product for the consumer. And then as you move into hybrids and stuff like that, like extended range hybrids or plug-ins, I mean, the internal combustion engine, becomes a generator, a source of power to eliminate range anxiety. Hopefully that the battery cost will at least drop in half, and the energy density will improve significantly. Fast charging will become a reality, and an infrastructure will emerge. And those things all have to exist for this stuff to come to fruition. And we haven't even talked about hydrogen cars yet.
We haven't, but let's talk about advanced manufacturing, because that's another area that you guys get into.
Exactly.
What do you think are some of the most promising technologies, or the most promising, that's going to start showing up in factories?
Well, we think a couple things. One is we think wireless systems communication in the factory environment is extremely important, because it gets a lot of the cabling and a lot of the infrastructure out of the way, and so you can really become much more efficient in how you use space. The other thing is the continuation of robots. But it's not robots just in isolation. I mean, today you have robots in there and they're kind of caged in. They do a welding function.
Because they're dangerous otherwise.
Because they're dangerous. Well, they'd be dangerous if you didn't make them safe.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the future, we see that, robots and humans are working shoulder to shoulder. And they basically, the robots have to be intelligent enough to know there's a human next to it. So,
Vice versa.
And the person would probably like to do that. The other tools that we develop in advanced manufacturing is we simulate the manufacturing plants before we build it. And the human is a very, very important element in the manufacturing process. So we've spent a lot of time, years, developing and continue to develop a digital human that is very representative in the digital world as we design our factories. And that's ongoing work, and we get smarter and smarter at doing that.
This is so you can simulate somebody actually working on the line to see if there's any safety or health or efficiency issues.
Efficiency, fatigue issues, injury.
So does that model then get used by the car companies?
Well, then that's an interesting next step, because car companies don't per se buy those models. They buy those models from suppliers who provide those tools and those models. So the next step, and this is where I said, we combine some interesting groups of suppliers or other industry players. Well, so we bring them in to work with us up front to refresh their models to have the latest wrist or neck.
And one other area that we didn't get into is vehicle safety, and we're getting down to the last couple of minutes. What are you doing in that regard?
Well, safety is one of the keys to all of this new technology, and there's a lot of factors that we work on. So we've had a safety group at USCAR for a long time. One of the big things they do is they work to develop crash dummies for the industry, and they work with other industry players. I'm not saying we do this alone, but we would take the lead to develop like a world SID dummy, a fifth percentile male or female or kid dummy, because you have to use these things not only in developing the vehicles, but certifying the vehicles for safety standards, and the regulatory agencies use these dummies also to develop their regulations. So we continually try to work on that and develop the dummies. The key thing about a dummy is that it does two things. One, it does what you want it to do, and it does it consistently every time.
And we should point out for anybody who doesn't know in the audience, these dummies can cost $500,000 a piece, and automakers have to have dozens of them for all their different crash tests. So a lot of science goes into them. Steve Zimmer, thank you for coming on. Very interesting seeing where this auto industry is going. And Gary Vassilash and Drew Winter, thank you guys for helping me pry some of this out of him. And I want to thank all of you for having tuned in to Autoline this week.
Production of Autoline This Week is underwritten by...
Let's talk truth. When buying a car, we all want a great deal. Yet it's possible you could pay thousands more for the same car as your neighbor. That's why TrueCar provides upfront pricing information and a network of TrueCar certified dealers that guarantee savings without negotiation. Now, if someone paid too much for their car, well, it won't be you. So, when buying a car, get guaranteed savings. Visit TrueCar.com.